down to Order Gaming. We're going to continue our playthrough of Enemy Action Ardennes German solo game, and we're now on December the 17th, which is the second turn of the German solo game. I just had a quick look at the video that we finished for December the 16th, and I think I probably missed one or two things in December the 16th. The only real one that matters, as far as I can see, is the fact that I only took one roadblock check when I moved into this hex, and I should have taken three. The one I took, I've checked the video, I rolled a 9, and that indeed was for the Elsenborn, but I do need to take two roadblock checks for these two, so I'm going to do that now before we start. So this one for this value of 3 is a roadblock, and the one for the value of 2 is not a roadblock. Alright, so that I think cleans up everything from December the 16th, and we'll move on to December the 17th now. Alrighty, well, having fixed the roadblock test I failed to make on the 16th, let's carry on with December the 17th. And the first step in the sequence of play is the reserve phase. So I've already taken the units that were in the December the 17th spot and put them in the appropriate boxes down here. They're now available to be deployed. And that's pretty much the reserve phase done. There's an extra step on December the 18th, but we don't have to worry about that right now. Then we get to the card preparation phase. So one of the first things you have to do is work out whether the Allied commander gets any more cards. And there's a handy little chart underneath the Allied command deck that tells us on the 17th there is a primary and 3 supplementary reinforcement cards to be added to the deck, and we can see that these have all got the 17th on the top, and there are indeed 3 supplemental and 1 primary. So these go to be added into the Allied command deck, and I'll shuffle those off camera. There are no cards to be added to the Allied action deck until December the 19th, so we don't need to worry about those. Then we move over to the German command deck, which on December the 17th, the calendar tells us that we have 7 supplemental cards to add in to form the draw pile. So we have a look at our current German command deck, and we have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So I'll give those a bit of a shuffle. Leave 1 behind and make 7 supplemental cards part of the draw pile. Notice that we don't use the ones that are discarded yet because we haven't finished going through the undrawn supplemental German command cards, and then we simply take all of the primary cards that we get to use every day and we pop them on top, and that forms the draw pile for the 17th once I've shuffled them. So that's the card preparation phase done. We move on to the supply phase. We don't have to check German supply since we're in supply from December the 16th to the 18th. We do have to check American supply though. There appears to be only one potential problem, and that is for these 2 units here. Everybody else seems quite easy to draw a line supply. The rules say that you have to draw a supply to a supply head, I think it's called, which is a road joining the western edge of the map, and your supply length is basically 4 hexes. So those 2 units will have to draw a line of supply to a road that is joined to the western edge of the map and is no longer than 4 hexes. The rules also say that, unlike a lot of the other zone of control rules, that you can draw that through an enemy-controlled hex as long as the hex you're drawing it through has a friendly unit in it. So we can see that these 2 units here can draw a line from there to there, which, although it's in an enemy-controlled hex, contains a friendly unit, making 1, back out here for 2, and onto this road here for 3, and then onwards to the western edge of the map. So these 2 units here are actually in supply for this turn. I don't think there's actually any American units out of supply right now. No, there aren't. Everybody else is in supply. So that was nice and easy, and that's the supply phase done. Actually, it's not supply phase done at all. There are a number of other steps yet. We are allowed to play a Bridge Engineers card as an event at this point. I haven't drawn my cards yet. If I had and I wished to play one, that would allow me to repair or build a bridge over the river. Fairly sure I'm not going to do that this turn. We'll leave that for later on in case we need it. After that, there is also a phase that starts on December the 21st called Allied Air Interdiction. We don't need to deal with that right now. Then we have to remove any roadblock markers that are not in both German and Allied communication. Well, I don't think there are 3 roadblock markers on the map, and they are all in Allied and German communication, so that we don't have to do any of that. And then finally, on December the 20th onwards, we have to do out-of-fuel checks for the Germans, and that basically involves looking at the cards that we've drawn and seeing if any of those tell us which divisions have run out of fuel. Once again, we don't have to deal with that now, and that really is the end of the supply phase. Alrighty, well let's crack on with the first impulse then, and I think the first card I'm going to play is the first SS Panzer Corps activation card. Allied command level now is 4, so when the command level cards I've played reaches more than 4 and these totaled up over here, as I've said before, then we're going to pass the impulse over. The first thing we have to do is we have to do an Allied reserve check for this roadblock, because we've activated this core. Any roadblocks next to units that are activated must take a reserve check. So this one is 3 or less, and there'll be a reserve in that hex. And this is a 6, so there is not, so we get to take that away. And now we get to activate the first SS Corps. I'll have a look at the movement and I'll get back when that's been done. Okay, so we've moved the first SS Panzer Corps. We only have 1 combat, I think, which is here. We're not going to attack with 1st SS Panzer Division here. I don't think the odds are good enough, and we're only attacking from 1 hex anyway. There are 5 combat value in defence and 21 in attack, making it 4-1. We're also going to add the fixed artillery combat tactic into our attack. This American unit is actually in communication, because it can trace a line of communication through these friendly units out here and out to the western edge. So it will get a card draw to see whether there's a combat tactic or an undetected Allied defender. And they have drawn no command as their event, which means that their combat tactic is going to be engineers. They already have missing 1. They already are protected for 1 hit by virtue of being in a town, and you can't improve position a unit in town, so there is no effect to that combat tactic. Okay, I'm going to organise the combat, get the chits drawn, and I'll be back. Okay, so we drew the first 4 counters out for the combat, and they did not go well at all. 1 hit on the attacker, minus 1 hit on the defender, so we chose not to draw any more chits out of the bag. I can't see us inflicting enough losses to move that unit out of the hex, so I think we're just going to take our 1 hit and be done with this combat. Okay, so it's now the Allied impulse. We have drawn the Allied command card. It happens to be 12th Corps. There are 2 12th Corps units on the board, 1 all the way down here and 1 here. The first option is special breaking the clouds. Well, it's not December the 18th yet, so we don't do that one. The next one is deploy all Corps reserves. Now, the Corps deployment for the 12th Corps is this purple line here, and the reason that this unit was deployed outside of its Corps reserve area, and the only time they're allowed to, as far as I'm aware, is because that was for a roadblock reserve test. And roadblock reserve tests allow units that are not in their core area to be deployed outside them as reserves. It's whichever is the unit that's most appropriate. So that's the reason why that was deployed out of its core area. So the 2 units that are in reserve have to be deployed in the area inside their core area. And in fact, there are no Allied position hexes that are proximate to a German unit. And that is one of the tests before you can place a unit. So all of these units here that are German cannot break through this Allied line here. They're all already in a zone of control, or in order to get past them we'll have to move up to a river, Umbridge River hex side, and won't be able to cross it, or we'll be moving from one zone of control to another. So I don't actually believe that any of these reserves are going to get placed, because there just are not any criteria at the moment that are going to fulfil their placement. So because we're not going to deploy any Corps reserves, we're going to move down the list. We can skip the assigned through replacements to Corps, because that only happens between the 20th and 29th, which means the next thing down is activate all units in the Corps. So We're going to put these reserves back in the reserve box, and I'm going to draw some Allied action cards. And we'll see what happens from there. So we've looked at activating all the units in the core, and the criteria under the rules say that in order to be able to activate the units specified on the card, then one of the following criteria must apply to at least one of the units that are being activated. So wandering behind enemy lines, well, neither of these two units are. In danger of surround but not surrounded, and not in a victory point hex. Well, he's in a victory point hex. He is in no way, shape or form in danger of surround from here at the moment. Out of contact, well no, both of these units are in contact. Or eligible to receive an improved position counter. Well, this guy is in Baston, so he can't, and this guy is in Echtenacht, so he can't either. So in actual fact, neither of these units are under the criteria eligible to be activated, so we're not going to activate either of them, which means that we carry on down the list, and the last item in the list is an event for the German solo game called Artillery Barrage. And looking that up, it says that, let me just make sure I've got this right, discard one German division card from your hand. No effect if no division card is in your hand. Well, I do not have a division card in my hand. As we can see here, this is a core card, this is a core card, that is a core card, that is a core card, and that is a core card. There are no specifications of divisions on any of those cards, and that's an army group card. So in actual fact, that activation will have no effect whatsoever. Now, what I do need to look up is if that event doesn't fire, whether I actually draw another Allied command card. So I'm just going to look that up, but I'm fairly sure that that event is going to fire and nothing's going to happen from it. Okay, well I've checked and I'm fairly sure that event counts as firing off. So that is in actual fact the Allied activation for this turn, or at least as far as I'm concerned. So back to the next German impulse. It's the next German impulse, and we're going to activate the 47th Corps, these purple counters here, part of the 5th Panzer Army. I will get the movements done. We've got no roadblock checks to do. We will have some roadblock checks to do as part of that, but we have not got any roadblock reserve checks to do because the activated units are not adjacent to those roadblocks. So I'll be back when I finish the movement. Well, we've finished our movement. We successfully managed to proceed along this road. We passed our roadblock check here and also here, and we didn't need one here because we had a unit already adjacent to that hex. We also moved our infantry unit up towards supporting the 58th Corps? Yeah, 58th Corps, our infantry unit, and we did indeed fail a roadblock check here, so there is now a roadblock there. We do, however, have this roadblock out of communication. It is now incapable of drawing a line of supply that isn't through a German zone of control, so we won't have to perform a reserve check to see if a reserve unit pops up there. We will do when we activate this core here to for that roadblock there. But that's the end of that movement. That costs us a command value of 3, so we've still got the remainder of our impulse to finish off. So I'll make my mind up about what I'm going to do about that. Okay, so we're going to bite the bullet here and activate the 68th Corps here, which means that we've got some roadblock defender checks to make here. This one, as we said before, is now out of communication, so we can remove that roadblock without having to take a check. This one, however, we will, and it has got a position value of 3, and we pass it, so that roadblock will now be removed without putting a defender on it, which does indeed leave the way open for some Vith for us, which is nice. So I'm now going to sort out what movement I'm going to do, and I'll return after that. Okay, so we've finished our movement for the 58th Corps. We managed to pass all of our roadblock tests, which is really kind of handy. So we've moved through St Vith, which is now ours, giving us 2 more victory points. This is important that it's now German controlled because that means that the Allies can't place reserves in there. And we've pushed on up here. We passed our 2 roadblock tests here. We've moved further over the river and tried to keep our units together rather than spread them out too much. There was a temptation to move some units down here, but I think this Panzer Corps has got it pretty much in hand. So there are no combats. This unit, can, as far as I'm concerned, can wither on the vine or wait until I've got enough time to finish it off. I think that's it for the German Impulse. Yep, that gives us 5 command values played, so we'll now turn it over to the American Impulse. Okay, so the Allies have drawn an 8th Corps command, and the first part of that command is to deploy all Corps reserves. Well, there are no 8th Corps reserves in the reserve box, so we move down the list. And the next one is quite interesting. It's called, in the German solo game, it's called Expedite Corps Reserves. And what that means is we're looking the next day, so the 18th of December, see if there are any 8th Corps units in the reserve box, and if there are, we bring them down into the reserve box, the in-play reserve box, allowing them to be deployed. And there are indeed 4 units available. All of the famous 101st Airborne Screaming Eagles. So they will now be available to be deployed onto the board when the 8th Corps reserves are called on in future. That was quite straightforward, and that is the end of the American Impulse. So, got this morning every intention of carrying on from where we left off last time. Watched a YouTube video earlier on today which talked about the 14th Cavalry Regiment in the Battle of the Bulge between the 16th and 18th of December. A really good video by Ace Destroyer. I thought I'd recommend you look it up. And then thought, I know, let's go and see where those guys are on the map. Well, by a happy coincidence, it transpires that they were never placed on the map in the right place at the start of the campaign. They've been lurking up here, where looking back on the videos, looks like I moved them there for part of the intro and never moved them back. And they should have been here, which obviously means that both the December the 16th and 17th turns have been impacted. Now there are a couple of solutions for this, obviously. There's the nuclear one, which is I just pack all this up, roll it back to the 16th and start again. I'm kind of naturally, it seems to me anyway, unwilling to do that really, so I'm going to have to take some alternative punishment. And my next move for this turn coincidentally involved this corps that I was planning, and I was planning to use 5th Army group card here to get in camera, to activate the 1st SS Panzer Corps and carry on driving through Elsenborn towards Monschau. So the logical thing seems to do to forfeit that turn. I really don't know whether that's enough to make up for the fact that I should have had to overrun this unit in the first turn or not. Obviously I'm further forward here than I should be. It's impossible to tell, isn't it? But that's what I'm going to do anyway. I'm going to take this card, I'm going to throw it in the discard pile as though I'd played it and give the Americans another impulse now. And then we'll carry on with the campaign. Let me know in the comments if you think that that is a ridiculous thing to do, for those who've got a bit more experience playing this than me, but that's really my solution for right now. So at least I can carry on rather than rolling the whole campaign back to the start again. So apologies for making that error. Not a lot I can do now other than try and fix it as best I can. Okay, so we're going to do the Allied Impulse after giving up the Army Group B card and forfeiting the 1st SS Corps activation. And the gods of the card draws have chosen to punish me, which seems only fair enough. So we drew the 5th Corps card here. The first option is to deploy all Corps reserves. There are 2 units of the 5th Corps in reserve, but in actual fact there are no hold positions that are available and valid to deploy a reserve. So this whole position here is adjacent to an allied unit, so it's not a valid position, and it's not a victory point hex either. None of these are proximate to German units, so they're not valid either. There's a possibility that one here might be. This 156th Panzer Regiment unit cannot go north of this line, so it cannot reach that hex, and there is no way for these 1st SS Panzer Corps units to actually in a move be able to reach this hex here. So this isn't an eligible hex either for deployment from a reserve. Since we're not going to deploy any reserves, the next one down that matters on the list is activate all units in the Corps. Now, in order to be able to activate all the units in the core, we have to fulfill the criteria for an activation for the AI. And those criteria are: the unit has at least one eligible unit must be able to do one of the following, or is one of the following. So, is it wandering behind enemy lines? We do not have any 5th Corps units wandering behind enemy lines at the moment. In danger of surround and not in a VP hex. Well, there is a possibility eventually this unit will become surrounded, but right now there is no way that the Germans can actually get round here without breaking and moving from one zone of control to another. So this is secure, so these units can't be surrounded. There is the danger that this one could become surrounded by the definition, and therefore that certainly fulfills one criteria. Are they out of contact? Well, there aren't any units that are out of contact at the moment. These can trace contact through here, out here, and along here and to the western map edge. Are any units eligible for improved positions, i.e. they're in supply, they're not in a hex of the town or city, already have one? Well, yes, there are several, aren't there? There is this unit here is eligible for an IP, this unit here. So many units here are eligible for an improved position, and therefore we are going to activate these units according to the activation rules. Okay, so we've drawn our 3 action cards, sorted them in numerical order, starting with the lowest. The top action is fill the gap. These numbers here represent the unit identifiers in the middle of the counter that apply. So everything starting with the highest unit nearest number 27, which I believe is probably 15 underneath that one. It says unit proximate to empty position to which a German unit is also proximate. Now, we don't have to obey the core lines when we're moving American units. That's only for deployment of reserves. So we can actually think about positions that are beyond this line, if you see what I mean. However, this unit here is on a unbridged river hex side. So really it can only reach possibly this hex or this hex or this hex. Now these two are position hexes. I do not believe that they are proximate to German units. Once again, this unit cannot get over this line here, that's its army boundary. These units here can reach this one for sure, and I believe is the only one that is proximate. However, this unit here can't reach that position, so this unit is not proximate to that position, so that does not apply. I don't think any of the others apply here because the Germans cannot move into these positions here, so these are not proximate. So I don't actually think any of these apply. Interesting to note that there are some criteria which the American units that may move have to adhere to, and the top one is preserve the line. Well, if this unit moves any further west or southwest here, that will break this line here where they have controlled zones of controls joining up here. So this unit would, regardless of what was happening over here, would want to preserve the line anyway. And since none of these have a whole position that is proximate to a German position behind them, there's no need to retreat any of these. So this card will not apply to any of the units in 5th Corps. Okay, so the next card on the list is open supply line. And the situation is either that the unit is proximate to an empty hex that, if occupied by that unit, would enable Allied units currently unable to trace supply to do so. Right now, all of these units can trace supply, as can this unit here in the 5th Corps. This unit, however, cannot. It needs to be 4 hexes away from a road that can trace communication to the western edge of the map. Now, if we count from here, we've got 1, 2. It can't count this one because that's in a German zone of control and there's no friendly unit there. So 1, 2, 3, 4 is the furthest it can trace, or 1, 2, 3, 4. Either way, the maximum length of its supply chain is to here. So this unit right now is out of supply if we assessed it for supply right now. No unit movement could make that unit, could create a situation where that unit is in supply. I don't believe, no, even if there was a unit here, for instance, 1, 2, 3, 4, it still couldn't reach supply. So case A does not apply here, or a unit unable to trace supply proximate to a hex from which it could do so. Well, it's got the movement points to move into a hex where it would be proximate. It could just hop from here to here, but units are not allowed to move directly from one zone of control to another, and there is no way that this unit can move from there to there, despite there being a friendly unit there. The rules specifically prohibit that, and it can't move from here to here and back into there, because that's in a German zone of control as well. So this unit that is out of supply at the moment under those rules is not allowed to move to a position where it can be in supply. All of the other units are in supply, and moving none of these units would help this unit become in supply. So once again, this card doesn't apply to any of the units, so we're going to carry on moving down the list. Okay, so we get to the third card then, which is called Withdrawal Under Fire, and this one starts from anything labelled 39 downwards. So we're going to start, I've just swapped these two counters over here. We're going to start with this unit here. Is the unit surrounded or in danger of surrounding a hex with less than 5 hold value? I believe this has a hold value of 2. And proximate or adjacent to a hex in allied communication. Well, it is definitely surrounded. Every single hex around it, regardless of allied unit presence, is in an enemy zone of control. So the rules for this site is to move to a hex in allied communication. Well, if it moved to this hex or this hex, both of these would be in allied communication. Ignoring German zones of control in the first hex entered, not left, but the first hex entered. Move additional hexes if able, with preference given to a hex from which allied supply can be traced. Well, the rules also say that in a rearward movement you should obey the blue retreat triangle, so that kind of makes its mind up about where this unit is going to go. So it still has to pay all the normal movement costs, so it's going to pay 2, one for moving into there and one for leaving a German zone of control. It can ignore all the zones of the control in this hex, which is why it's allowed to move from there to there. Ordinarily it wouldn't be allowed to move from one zone directly from one zone control to another. It now has 1 movement point left, which isn't enough to move it into the forests, because this unit technically is still surrounded. The Germans are still exerting a zone of control over the 6 hexes, but unfortunately it has to stop there. And then the same applies for the next unit down here. And now we move down the list to number 7. Well, that clearly is not in any danger of being surrounded, so we can ignore that one. But this unit here, number 6, is, once again, it's having a zone of control from the enemy exerted into all 6 hexes around it, so it technically is surrounded according to the rules. And once again, it is going to withdraw to a hex in allied communication, ignoring the first German zone of control, which allows it to back out of. So once again, this is going to move and pay the cost for leaving that zone of control, and pay 2 for moving that, so that is going to be 3, and that is the rest of its movement. So we have activated both of these units. So for the next activation, we're going to activate the 57th Panzer Corps again, see if we can make some progress towards Bastogne. I'll be back when I've completed the movement. Okay, we've finished our movement. We hopped this infantry regiment across the river, where it promptly had to do a roadblock check for Wiltz, and it duly generated one. We made roadblock checks here and here that we passed as we moved our units along the road to attack Bastogne. We also moved one unit by strategic movement because it started on a road, and strategic movement allows German armour to move up to 10 hexes. It has to stay on the road, it has to start on a road, it cannot be adjacent to an enemy unit, it cannot finish its movement adjacent to an enemy unit, and it cannot go further west than the westmost unit in the army. So we've moved it all the way along the road to here, basically 10 hexes, and that fulfills all the criteria. We also advanced an infantry unit along the road as well. So that's the movement for the 47th Corps, in fact. And we're now going to try and see if we can bounce Bastogne, so we'll get that combat organised. Okay, we've drawn the Allied Command card for the defence of Bastogne. It is a formation card of 12th Corps, which matches the formation that's defending Bastogne. The rules say that if there is a unit in reserve that matches that corps, then we deploy that as an undetected Allied defender, and preference must go to a unit division that matches the unit that's already in Bastogne. As it happens, there is another 4th Division infantry unit there, so we're going to add that to the defence, making the odds now 6 in defence versus 6 and 8 is 14, turning the odds down to 2 to 1 now. Okay, I'll draw the chits for the combat and we'll see where we go. Okay, so we've completed drawing the chits. The initial 2 we draw, neither applied, and then we chose to draw the remaining 5, making it 7. 3 of those did not apply. These 2 did, which means that the defenders are going to take 1 hit, which they're going to shrug off because they're in a town, and then the attacker will also take 1 hit. So the Allies have successfully held Bastogne for the moment. Alright, so it's the Allied impulse now, and they have drawn the 18th Airborne Corps, and the first option on there is to deploy the 7th Airborne and the 7th Armoured and the 82nd Airborne Division Reserves. Well, the 82nd Airborne aren't due to be put in the reserve pile till tomorrow. However, there are 3 7th Armoured Division counters available for reserve placement. So I'll look into where they go and I'll get back to you. Okay, so I've laid out the counters to show you where I think the reserve possible reserve placements are. Here is the 18th Airborne Corps reserve limit of deployment, so they can't deploy anywhere south of that line. And the rules say that they must be an empty position hex in the unit's core area, able to trace supply, and they must also be proximate to a German unit. Now, these units here present a problem in terms of determining where the proximate Germans are, because there are a lot of hexes that they can be proximate to, but I think I've got that bit right. And then they can't be in danger of surround, which basically means they can't be in danger of a German units completing a zone of control, having zones of control in all 6 hexes around the possible placement area. And the ones in black, I believe, are all in danger of being surrounded, either by units of the 47th Corps, just off the map here, coming north and cutting off these hexes here, or units of the 58th Corps here, move along on the roads and coming in behind these hexes here. Which leaves me with the yellow counters here. So if I just take the black ones off for a minute, so we can see what we're doing. Well, the rules say that if there is more than 1 position, then we should check to see if they're within 3. We can place it within 3 hexes of a unit in the same division. Well, we cannot. There are no other 7th Armoured units on the board. Within 3 hexes of the same corps, well, I only can see 1 18th Airborne Corps unit here, and none of those hexes that are eligible are within 3 hexes of the same corps, which means that we must place them within 3 hexes of the same army, and this unit here is of the same army, the 1st Army. So if there is more than 1 position, and there are these 2 here, then we place it in the hex with the highest hold value. So I think the 1st unit is going to be placed in Stavelot, and that is going to be the unit with the lowest ranking number in the middle. They deployed first. Now, from there, that unit is now immediately treated as though it is on the map, so the next unit that gets deployed will treat that unit as already present, and we go through the same process again. Obviously the surround hexes etc are the same as they were before, I believe. Yes, that's the case. But now there is a unit within 3 hexes of the same division when we deploy the next one. So 1, 2, 3, it will be 1, and it can't be adjacent to a unit that's already on the map. So I believe the next unit will be deployed in Toipoint. And then once again 3 hexes from that unit being deployed, 1, 2, 3, well, it'll be either Manhaven or the hex next to it, and once again it will go into Manhay, sorry, not Manhaven. So I believe that is the deployment for the 7th Armoured Division, neatly sealing off my advance there, and also coincidentally, as you'll see, occupying pretty much all of the important points that you'd want the Americans to occupy So the AI has done a very good job deploying its reserves there. Assuming I've done that correctly, once again feel free to comment if you think that I've missed a trick there in deploying the reserves. So it's the German impulse. The Germans have 6 cards left and none left in the draw pile, so we're getting towards the end of the 17th of December, and should the Germans get an expedite reserve command now, that's going to mean bad things for us, I suspect, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it and explain why that might be. Okay, so we're going to play the 58th Panzer Corps, and the first thing we must do when these units are activated is we must take a check to see if this roadblock here is replaced with any defenders, and it is not. Okay, normally I'd finish the movement, but I think I'm going to move this counter and explain what I'm doing and why here, as it's quite interesting. So obviously we don't have to make a roadblock check for this hex here because we're adjacent to it, so we're going to move this unit here for 1. We do have to make a check for that unit, for a roadblock check for there, which there is not. It's a 7. We would have still been able to move away from there if there was a roadblock because we're not connected by a road, so we're not forced to stop. So that is for 1. We're now going to move here for 2. Now, ordinarily we'd make a roadblock check for here. However, this hex here is no longer in supply now we've moved there. It cannot trace a line of 4 hexes this way for being in supply because it's in our zone of control, and it cannot trace a line of hexes, a 4 hex distance this way because it is in this German unit zone of control. It can trace it this way, however, the rules say that if you're crossing an unbridged river hex side, then the distance you can trace to a road that leads to a supply is 1, and there is no road in this hex. So this unit here, this hex here rather, is out of supply and therefore is not eligible for a roadblock check, which means that we're just going to be able to drive into Wiesbaden. Now I'll just continue with the movement and finish it rather than make you wait for the rest of the meeting, but I thought that was quite worth exploring and why I moved the way I did. Finished our movement, we encountered a roadblock here as the 60th Panzer Regiment moved across out from Wiesbaden. We've moved our other 116th Panzer units westward here. Didn't fail any more roadblock checks along the way. We've also shuffled the 560th Infantry Regiment out and in again to make sure that this unit can't retreat into St. Vith. We could, if we want, declare an attack here at 2-1, but I don't think we will. I think we'll leave that for this activation, and that's cost us 2 command values, so we've still got 2 left to play for before the American impulse arrives. Okay, so we're going to play this card and activate the 2nd Panzer Division. As you can see, it's a division card for 1 command value, and the 2nd Panzer Division has a counter here, here and here. So we are going to move this counter here for 2 movement points, for 4 movement points, and we must take a bridge demolition check at this point. And a 10 means it is not blown up. And then down here for 5. We're then going to move this counter here 1, 2, 3, 4 into this hex here. And we're going to declare a battle hex in Baston. And we are then also going to play a combat tactic of reinforced battle, and because this unit has not moved yet or taken part in the battle in its activation, we are going to include this by using the reinforced battle tactic, which means that we're able to use I think the top 2 counters of this stack, yes, the 2 counters in this stack and this unit here will all take part in this battle as we try and kick them out of Baston. I moved this unit around here because that means that we now count as a flanking attack because we're coming from 3 hexes. And now the only decision left is, are we going to play any more combat tactics? Okay, so we've drawn a combat tactic for the Allies. It does not match the unit that's in the defence here. There are no units for the 18th Airborne Corps here, so it's going to imply a combat tactic which is going to be engineers for the 16th 17th December, which will normally place an IP counter on the position, improved position, but obviously they're in a town so they don't get the benefit of an improved position, so that combat tactic is going to be relevant. Okay, so we're attacking at 3-1 with a minimum draw of 4 and a maximum of 7. We drew 3 counters out of the initial 4 that didn't apply and 1 that did. Then we drew the remaining 3 and all of these applied. So obviously we're going to get rid of 1 hit for the town, which gets rid of that one. We're going to have to take 2 hits and the defender is going to have to take 3 hits. I'll resolve that and then we'll get back. Okay, so we've applied the results. There were 3 steps to take and it made its first 2 hold checks to stay in baston, which meant that it took 2 hits, and then the remaining hit would have meant that if we took an additional step loss, there would have been no zone of control from those units in that hex. So it then took the option to retreat 1 hex. So we have taken baston, which is a massive step forward, huge step forward for us. We're really pleased with that. So obviously we're going to take a fuel marker. Shall we see if that's got some fuel in it? It has. Awesome. And then we get to advance after combat, and I think we are going to advance this Panzer here and these 2 Panzerlehr units here. Now we get a second advance after combat, but I don't think we can actually do that because we'll be moving from one zone of control to another zone of control, and it won't be along the path of the retreat because the unit only retreated this far, so I think that's the only way we can respond. However, we have another massive increase in victory points to 5, so 8 and 5 puts us on 13, I believe. Making some progress. Okay, and that cost us 2 command points, 2 command values, so that actually finishes the German impulse. Time to hand over to the Allies. Okay, so we've drawn an Allied command card. It is the 5th Corps card, 1st Infantry, 9th Infantry and 5th Armoured Division, and the first command is to deploy those reserves for any of those units. Well, we have a 1st Infantry Division and a 9th Infantry Division counter in the reserve, but there is nowhere to deploy them that fits the criteria. All of these hexes are not proximate to German advance, and this is the limit of their core deployment area, so they can't deploy south of here. And certainly any chance of surrounding these hexes here has gone with the deployment of the 7th Armoured Division here. So we're not going to deploy any reserves, which means we're going to move down and activate the 1st, 9th and 5th Armoured Division counters on the board. There is one, this 1st Infantry Division counter there, and the rules about activating units on the board are: is it wandering by enemy lines? It certainly isn't. It's not in danger of surround, and it is not in a VP hex. It is not out of contact, it is not dispersed, and it is also not eligible for an improved position because it's already got one. Therefore, there will not be any activations for that, so we can carry on moving down the list. And the next event here is withdrawal, and that Allied event says move 1 surrounded Allied unit stack in a non-VB hex to an adjacent hex on which it can trace communication. Now, having had a look, this unit is definitely surrounded and it would definitely like to withdraw, but unfortunately the only hex it can withdraw to that would leave it in communication is this hex here, which is already overstacked. That is not true, it is not overstacked. So we could certainly do the top action for one of those units. So we're going to take the lowest ranked unit in that stack as the lead unit, which I think is the top one anyway, and we're going to move it 1 hex here to implement the withdrawal. That one unfortunately cannot do it. So that is the Allied impulse over as we've committed the event. Okay, so I think it's time to try and put this 106th Infantry Division counter out of its misery. So we're going to activate the 66th Corps here. We're going to have to track across the river, but I think that'll be okay given how weak it is. So we're going to activate it and move these units into combat. 1, 2, 3. Just checking I could move in there. So that leaves us with an attack of 4 and 5 is 9, and 2 is 11, halved is 5, against 1 is 5 to 1. The allied unit is not in communication, so it will not get an undetected allied defender. It might, however, get a combat tactic, so we'll draw a card for that. And indeed it does. It gets engineers, which I think is probably going to put it in an improved position on it. Yeah. I don't think he's in a town or city, no, so he is indeed going to get an improved position. Hopefully that won't make any odds. I'll get the combat done and then we'll be back. That's the results of the combat. As you can see, we drew the initial 2 for the defending steps out. We got a hit there. We then chose to withdraw 4 more out. We actually had a maximum possible chits of 7, but we only chose, so we could have drawn an additional 5, but we only drew 4. As you can see, that D1 is going to wipe out that D1 there, and then we drew attacker 1 D2 there. So there are going to be 3 hits on the defender and 1 hit on the attacker. Okay, so those hits wiped out the unfortunate American unit, the 106th Infantry Division. It did actually conduct a retreat according to the AI, and it could have gone either here or here. As it happened, it went there. I think I ended up rolling a dice for that. So we could, this panzer unit crossed the bridge in the advance, and this infantry unit crossed this unbridged hex side, of which only 1 unit is allowed to do that. So in actual fact, we could continue into a second hex with our panzer unit, and that's what we're going to do, and we're just going to move it down the road into St. Vith, I think. For our second advancement, there are no enemy zones of control, so we're free to advance where we like. And that is 2 command points of our 4 available played, and we'll carry on until we reach 4. Okay, we're going to continue with the German Impulse, and we're going to activate the 67th Corps, which are these red counters here. First time I've activated these in the game so far, and we're going to try a bit of a shot to nothing, I think. So we're not going to move any of these, but we are going to move the 277th Infantry Regiment, and we're going to move it down to here, and we're going to execute a 2-to-1 attack on this 99th Infantry Division counter here. The aim really being to try and get a single step loss on this counter so that it no longer exerts a zone of control along this road here. Okay, so we played the Combat Engineers card to deny the enemy getting an improved position, and sure enough, the card that we drew for the Allied Command card is inevitably an Engineers. So we've got lucky there, we've denied them an improved position, and there will be no undetected defenders either, which was also a huge risk for this attack. So so far things going well. Let's draw the chit and see what happens. Okay, so we finished the combat. We had a minimum draw of 2 for the 2 steps of the defender, a maximum of 4 because we have 1 unit attacking, and he happens to be a 3-step unit, so we get an extra plus for that. The result was that 3 of the counters didn't apply, and the only one that did gave us a step attacker hit. So we're going to take 1 hit on the attacker, and that'll be the end of the combat. That also ends the German Impulse as well, and once the Allied Impulse is finished for the next one, that will also end the day. So we are very near close to the end of December 17th. Okay, so we've drawn the final Allied command card for December the 17th. It tells us that we need to activate the 2nd and the 99th Infantry Divisions. So there is a unit here for the 99th, and I believe there is a 2 seconds and a 99th in this hex here as well. I believe that's a fit, yeah. So these units here. According to the Allied activation sequence, some of these units are definitely in danger of surround. This unit in particular actually is technically already surrounded, and these units here are eligible for an IP position counter. So these units are going to be activated, so I'll draw the 3 Allied action cards and go through exactly what happens when they're activated. Okay, so we've drawn the action cards. The top action card is called Fill the Gap, and says that unit is a unit proximate to empty position to which a German unit is also proximate, and that is not true. Particularly that position with a whole value of less than 5 may not be in another Allied zone of control. So Fill the Gap isn't going to apply to either of these stacks here. Okay, so we've looked at the second card, Withdraw Under Fire. There definitely is 1 unit that applies to. And that unit is this 395th Infantry Regiment, 99th Infantry Division here. It is currently surrounded, and it is proximate or adjacent to a hex in Allied communication, which is this hex here. However, moving there would break the stacking limit, which they're not allowed to do. So they can't move to this hex. I'm actually a bit unsure whether the order therefore would require them to move an additional hex, but I can find nothing in the rules that suggests that's the case, and the instructions do say to stop upon entering a hex not in danger of surround, and this hex is not in danger of surround. So I'm going to skip past that one as well and assume that none of those are eligible for that action. And then finally is pull back, unit stacking a hex with a less than 5 hold value, able to move and out of communication or in danger of surround. Or once again, the only one that this applies to is this unit here, because there are no additional rules saying that he can ignore the zone of control for the hex he's moving into. This unit isn't able to move either for that pullback either. So in actual fact, I do believe that none of these three apply for those units, which does mean that these units are all going to get an improved position. And if I can find some counters, here we go, I will put those on. I think there is one there, yeah. So let's just put them all under there in an improved position now. Okay, so I think I've done that correctly. The only thing I think I may have done wrong is assuming that this unit under the second action that we had may have been able to pull from here back to here. But as the rules as written, at least as I've read them, would suggest that they're not allowed to do that. And that therefore ends the Allied impulse and the day of December the 17th. Okay, so we now get to the end of day phase. We have to check the victory conditions. Well, we're not close to getting victory yet, and we're not required to until December the 20th, I think, for the campaign. We have to return all of the chits into the bag, which I'll do, and then we can also remove all dispersed and out of fuel markers from the map. Well, there are no dispersed or out of fuel markers, so that's the end of the day phase done.
Thanks ever so much for joining me for December the 17th of this German solo playthrough of Enemy Action Ardennes. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and you look forward to getting the next turn done and putting it up on the internet. I told you once.